it's not really time to
Do you love the sinner but hate the sin?
I mean, I try to not let my... I think there's something in our nature that loves good and dislikes evil. That's not just me. I think we all feel this way. The revolutionary aspect of Christianity is not to say that. Aristotle would have agreed. In fact, Aristotle says it is impossible to love a bad man, because how can you love badness in a man? Christ gives a different answer, and that is, Christ says, don't stop hating the badness, but love the man anyway. So you're turning a love doctrine into a hate doctrine. The love doctrine is the doctrine that separates the sin from the sinner instead of saying, here's a man who did bad things, I'm going to strike a compromise. I'm going to not dislike the badness so much, because it's, after all, a good guy. Christ says, no, dislike the badness completely, but then also love the guy completely. I mean, that seems to me to be a beautiful doctrine that separates the bad action from the inner worth of the person.
Thank you.
All right, my question is directed towards Dr. Shermer. And as a Christian male, As a Christian male, I like that you brought the Bible up. This is on homosexuality. I find revealed in the Bible that mankind, that I myself am fallen, that all of nature, all of creation is fallen. And so therefore I am unable to look at it as an example to put out the premise of how I should live, or what I should do, or what is normal. That God has revealed himself and revealed that I was created for a woman, and that woman was created for man, and that in my revelation of him being my creator, I, out of love, respond to his purpose for me.
If you could get to your question, please.
My question for you is, how do you see there being able to have, as you said, that homosexuality someday will be a part of the church, when very clearly the whole issue of homosexuality in the church is that it is outside of the purpose of the Creator, of the purpose of the creation. That you can never reconcile those two, because it's been, as a Christian, I believe it's been stated, that is not our purpose.
Well, I was pretty clear on this. You're basing this entirely on one single passage.
No, Romans 1:20 through 27 talks about the corruptible nature of man, but even of creation. That
no, I'm just talking
to say that an animal, well, look at
as a sin.
All right, let Dr. Shermer.
I mean, you're basing this entire thing on this one passage. That homosexuality is a man shall not lie with a man. That's it, Leviticus. That's all you get.
Can I read
because it won't say that. Well, I don't consider homosexuality bad. What's bad about it? Well, I mean, if you get married to a woman, how does some other same-sex couple, how does that hurt you? What do you care what they do? These are consenting adults. We're not talking about polygamous 13-year-olds and 50-year-old guys. Just consenting adults. What do you care what they do in their bedroom? Why is that your business? Mind your own business.
I'm going to have to cut you off, but thank you for your question. Dinesh, would you care?
Well, I have a thought, but I'll come back to it. In the interest of time, I don't mind moving on.
And over here, on my right.
Okay, you stated that the worldview of rationality derived from Christianity. Could you explain further exactly how that developed from Christianity? You didn't explain that.
The question is about how do we get this sort of idea of a rational universe from Christianity. The idea of the rational universe was actually first thought of by the pre-Socratics. The pre-Socratics, if you go back to Thales and so on, they had this sort of idea that the universe is in some ways coherent. Look at Thales, he says everything is water. Now if you think about it, this is crazy. How can everything be water? But what Thales is saying is behind the superficial diversity of the world, there is a kind of single entity, namely water. He was wrong about what the entity was, but he had a kind of insight, which is that perhaps there is an underlying something that explains the manifest diversity of everything. So the pre-Socratics were onto something, but in a sense Socrates came along and said, listen guys, you're talking too much about nature, let's talk about human nature. And we see a big shift in philosophy away from nature and toward human nature. In the medieval era, this notion of the rational universe is picked up, but it's given a much deeper and more elaborate foundation. And the idea here is that the universe is rational because God is not only omnipotent, which is powerful, but omniscient. Omniscient means all-knowing. So the universe is going to reflect to some degree, the creation will reflect the creator. The universe shows those traces or signatures of divine rationality. This is what the medieval Christians believed. You can read it in Augustine, you can read it in Boethius, you can read it in many of the medieval thinkers. And that's why you have the invention of theology. Theology is an effort to give rational meaning to the universe. If you go into Islam, you don't find an equivalent to theology. Even in Judaism, you have jurisprudence, Maimonides, the disputations of the meaning of the Torah, but nothing resembling Christian theology to use human reason to intuit the purposes of God in the rational universe. What I'm getting at is the medieval Christians developed this edifice. And modern science didn't grow out of a rebellion against Christianity, it grew out of a debate within two strains within Christianity. My new book, What's So Great About Christianity, traces this history. There was an inductive strain in theology, and then there was a deductive strain. You can think of Aquinas as reflecting the inductive, and you can think of Anselm as reflecting the deductive. You see this even in their arguments for God's existence. Modern science draws on that tradition to develop the idea of the rational universe, and the scientists saw themselves as physicians. I mean, Copernicus was a deacon in the cathedral and said, I wanted to become a theologian, but I became an astronomer pretty much for the same reason, to demonstrate the rationality of God in the universe. There's a whole literature on this. Newton wrote more on scripture than he wrote about science, and he hadn't read Richard Dawkins' book, I guess. He didn't know that these two things were totally contradictory.
I have a response to this.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that chapter in your book is one of the best. It's the best chapter in your book on the Galileo stuff. But you didn't take it far enough. Yes, the rational world comes from these two strands, Athens and Jerusalem, let's say. I think you got all that right from a historian of science point of view. But in the middle of the scientific revolution, you talked about Galileo and Kepler and Copernicus, but there was also William Harvey and Vesalius and Gilbert on magnets and so on. What it was a battle of the books, the book of nature and the book of authority. The book of authority was both Athens and Jerusalem. It was Aristotle and Aquinas. And what the scientific revolution was revolting against was that if you actually go out into nature and look to see if it really is that way, whether the authority comes from church or from a secular source like Athens or Jerusalem, it doesn't matter. We still have to go out and check. It's the empirical nature of science that I think was so revolutionary.
Yeah, just a very brief thought about Galileo, because it illuminates this whole controversy. See, today when we read the Galileo thing, we think, oh, Galileo was right, the church was wrong. I would submit that this is what can be called a retroactive fallacy. We know today that we live in a heliocentric system. We know today that Galileo was right. That was not known in Galileo's time. The best astronomers in the world did not agree with Galileo. Galileo made arguments for the heliocentric system, but his arguments were often wrong. He thought that you could prove the fact that the Earth moved around the sun by looking at the tides. He actually had a completely wrong understanding of heliocentrism. When he came before Cardinal Bellarmine said to Galileo what I consider to be an eminently reasonable scientific statement. He said, Galileo, you could be right. He said, but the fact is, we don't know. The evidence is inconclusive. If you can show me a demonstrative proof that the Earth goes around the sun, I think it is only reasonable for the church to admit that we have been understanding Scripture in the wrong way. There is no possibility that the book of nature and the book of Scripture can be in conflict. So if you show me real proofs that you're right, we will revise our interpretation of the Bible in line with your demonstrations. But since you don't have these demonstrations, underline, therefore we are in a position that it is better to preserve the ancient teaching until the evidence comes into the contrary. This, I would suggest, is an absolutely sensible model, not only of church doctrine, but of pedagogy. You're teaching something, it's been established for a long time, common sense supports it. In other words, when you throw an object in the air, if the Earth is moving at thousands of miles an hour, it would seem to land at a different spot. So it wasn't just that the Bible said, human evidence seemed to support Ptolemy. The Galileo controversy shows us, if we will read it modestly, that there's a lot of arrogance on both sides. This was a case where ultimately Galileo was vindicated, but only a generation later. That's when the evidence did come in, and that's when Galileo was shown to be correct.
That was one heck of a question. I appreciate that for two reasons. One, it was terse, and two, it brought about such a book on this end of things. Please make your questions equally terse if you can. Next question.
Mr. Shermer, you have said repeatedly that the Bible only says that homosexuality is wrong in one passage.
Okay, well, maybe there's incorrect. Whatever. Yeah.
Well, no, not whatever. It's important to be factually correct in a debate, is it not?
I don't care. If there's 2 places or 3 places, it says stoning to death.
So were you factually correct or were you not factually correct? Have you ever read the document in its entirety?
The Bible? Oh, yeah.
Let's
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead. I mean, so whether it says
were you
stoning to
aware
death,
that there are multiple?
look, I don't care if it says executing adulterers 27 times. That's
Okay.
still wrong. Okay,
let's
look,
stop. Dr. Shermer,
Well, I mean, you brought it up, so.
All right, go ahead.
The question
What's your
has had enough.
So were you
If it's
also
that-
aware that about the surest way to reduce
I'm sorry,
life
sir. I'm going to have
expectancy
to
is to be
interrupt
gay? Did you know that?
Dr. Shermer, please, you don't have to respond to that.
What-
This is not a time for dialogue, sir. I'm sorry, but I think he can respond to your
Wait, he
first
did
question.
get a question about
and let's
Was
leave
you
it there.
aware that the surest way to reduce your life expectancy is to be gay? One of the surest ways.
That's it. I'm sorry, sir. You got enough.
Actually, the surest way is
Check it out. You'd be surprised.
is smoking. So I'm sure somewhere in the Bible it says thou shalt not smoke.
Well,
Look,
Just
okay,
go-
let me give a better answer to that. It doesn't matter if it says it once, twice, 3 times. Why is it wrong?
What matters if you claim it only mentioned it once?
Well, that's not what I say.
let me, Mike, I'm going to come to your defense here in this way. We're seeing here a little bit of the difficulty of having a debate like this one, and I think it's this.